this meeting to order. North Carolina General Statutes 16OA-171B1 allows council to add an agenda item to the special meeting agenda if all council members are present. Therefore, I'd like the council to consider adding a planning board vacancy discussion during this meeting. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Council, do we need to go into closed session?
I don't think so.
What is the agenda for this meeting right now? What is other than the vacancy you just
The
mentioned?
agenda, this meeting here is for rules considering on the cabanas to deal with the vendors and us having cabanas.
And we've got closed session
Just in
ability.
case, yeah.
I would like to go into closed session to discuss generally what's being asked of me today and what I believe I can and cannot discuss as town council in open session, then we can reconvene in open session. Would be my preference. I'm seeing this right now
Yeah.
for the first time.
Can I have a motion that we'll go into closed session?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
have a motion that we open this session back up in our meeting.
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye. Can we take a recess now for lunch?
Up for our discussion right now will be issues regarding regulations and rules for our cabanas, for our vendors, and for our people. We're looking at setting up a set of rules, and that's what we're open for. Floor is open for discussion. Any of our councilmen?
Let me just tell the folks what I've done. The council has a set of notes, Cabana discussion notes for this meeting, to outline a number of things that we need to discuss, not necessarily in this order. One starts, should there be a permitting process, and if so, all the details. Should be there a limit on number of how many cabanas a vendor could erect on any given day, then how, what limit, those types of things. Should we adjust the times that are being set up? Can we have vendors put empty cabanas out there on the beach and then rent them on a walk-in basis? How do we control speed limits, parking, and things like that of the delivery service? Should we change the fines that we have currently, $250 per infraction? Should renting of umbrellas be treated sort of in the same way in terms of times and where they put them or any of those types of things? And should vendors have insurance liability and other requirements? So that's a list of things that we need to address today to try to come up with a set of rules. That's.
Anyone else got some comments?
No, let's just
Ready to start it up?
start discussing.
All right. Basically, first up, should there be a permit process for vendors? That would be the first thing we need to bring up and discuss. Floor is open. Any other councilman?
I believe we should have a permitting process.
I agree with that. We have to have some control.
One of the big questions, I think, with all the rules that we would put in place is how do we enforce them? And I think the only way to enforce them is to have some recourse with the vendors if they don't follow the rules. So to me, the only way to do that is with a permit.
I agree with the statements of the other council members.
Anyone else got a comment?
I don't like adding bureaucracy, but I think that's the only way to go. That's.
Can I ask
So-
a procedural question? Is this supposed to be a give and take with the people attending, or it's just?
No, it's
No.
just a meeting between
No.
us.
Okay.
Pull the mic. Pull your mic closer, please, Tom.
Gotcha.
Yep, sorry.
All right, so with that being said, do we want to vote on this? To bring this, to put this in, and then we'll work off the details from that? But knowing that our rules would have a deal about a permit in there? Do we need to look toward that? Since it's evident y'all are all pretty much on line with that?
It seems we all think we should have a
Yeah.
permitting process, so
Okay.
Yeah.
that sounds reasonable to me.
Okay. I make a motion that we set up a permitting process.
Second.
Terms to be determined.
Yes.
Yeah.
Have a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Okay, basically next up.
Are we gonna talk about how to do that now?
Well,
Do we want to say that that's for commercial vendors, not for the individual? Does that need to be in there?
Yeah.
commercial, yes, a commercial vendor permit.
Yes, yeah.
All right, I guess we'll come up with a fee. Do you want to do that, or do we want to push that to another time where we can sit down and actually really think about this and get our ideas together, or do you want to go ahead and proceed into that today?
Should we let the staff study that and come up with an appropriate fee, or?
If I may, real quick, my understanding of today's meeting was for y'all to come together with everything that y'all wanted, permitting, processes, enforcement. we still would have to come back to y'all with an ordinance amendment for y'all to
Yeah.
vote on. So it's not like these changes will take effect until you approve that ordinance. At that time, we'll also ask you to update the fee schedule if you want to add a application permit fee or something to that effect. It doesn't need to be in the ordinance, it'll be in our fee schedule. But the cost of it can be deliberated today, it can be deliberated later. But even though all these changes that y'all might be looking at today, we'll still have to draft into an ordinance and have the attorney review prior to y'all going through your first reading with it. So my recommendation would be to go ahead and hash out everything you want us to load into an ordinance. The permitting process doesn't have to be in the ordinance other than that it will be a permit must be issued by X department. And then that process can be procedurally or policy handled. It's just that it'd be known that a permit is necessary from, like I said, X department, most likely fire department for the beach patrol. But based on the manpower, it may still go through inspections. I'm not sure yet. So that kind of thing internally can be figured out amongst staff. What we need for y'all to do is give us the direction of what we need to write into an ordinance and figure out.
Does anybody up here have any ideas about these?
I do, if I can speak.
Okay, yeah.
I, looking at it and listening and seeing and reviewing different things, maybe per se a fee of maybe 500 for the permit.
And what's that get them?
That gets them the permit to be able to use it on our beach.
I mean,
They would-
do we tell them how many?
if we want to limit the numbers, we would do a number limit maybe on the number of tents or cabanas or whatever, the cabanas that are there, we would limit a number, say 30 cabanas per company.
Well, at that rate, you may run into an issue where companies could evolve very quickly. And so you could have multiple company names operated by the same people to obtain a higher number of cabanas. So could we potentially look at the option of doing maybe a bidding process for the permits on an annual basis that, say, late fall, we would open up the bidding process for the vendors who at that point would be able to put a bid in to operate on the beach. This would generate some revenue for the town. That's one of the concerns from the citizens is the vendors are making money off our beaches and the citizens have to operate within those confines but don't see any benefit from it themselves.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, ma'am.
I think that possibly before we say a number for each vendor, we need to know how many spaces are available.
Yeah.
And vendors should not be able to take up 100% of the space that's available on our beach. So I think maybe we should decide whether we're going to limit the spaces that can be put on our beach. But first of all, we need to know how many spaces we've got.
And when we figure that number out, are you looking maybe at like a 60-40? Are you looking more like a 75-25, 75 for the vendors? Or the 60-40
No, at
for-
least 60-40.
60-40 would be a fair number?
Right,
Because we know most
Vendor
definitely there's gonna be more.
Yeah.
Yeah, the vendors would have the 60%, at least 60% of the overall space once we figure that out.
right.
And would we wanna proceed into mapping out basically how many spots we have available on the beach?
Exactly. I think that's the only way we can do it.
Well, we had a citizen,
John Farrell.
Yeah, that
John
worked up
Farrell,
a
who
number for us.
worked up a number, and based on his number that hasn't been validated, but he explained it pretty clearly, he said there's a maximum of 360 cabana spaces
Correct.
on the beach, leaving 10 foot in between them. My math's not that
We
good.
also have another
Saying that, we
separation
could
requirement.
basically look at a fair number as going 200 for vendors, 160 for our citizens.
Right,
Would be a pretty much percentage getting that 60% rate, correct?
right.
But I think the other part to that formula is they need to be evenly spaced.
Correct.
So the prime areas people want to have a cabana is the ones close to the pier and the bathrooms and everything. So I think it needs to be somehow divided.
Mhm.
What John had done, he had worked it out to the spaces between
Correct, yes, on this paper.
the walkways, and he had figures that 9 cabanas can fit into that space, so I think it needs to be that the 60-40 split, whatever we figure, would be evenly divided.
Basically, about
with
6 of those would be available for vendor spots, and 3 at least would be left for our citizens.
That's right.
Correct? Y'all
Right.
agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah, question for Hiram. Did you look at, John Farrell's,
Yes, sir. It came in yesterday afternoon and reviewed it. I don't know if it takes into account the separation we have away from the walkways itself. It's not, you can't just go up to a cabana all the way up to the walkway, you still have another 15 foot. So I haven't gone through to verify the measurements, because, like I said, we got it yesterday afternoon. There's been,
John Farrell's a member of our ERC, and he's an engineer. And, this looked pretty good to me.
I mean, I'm
Well-
sure it's not that far off. We haven't gone through to validate,
Yeah.
because, I'm not altogether sure that every access has the same amount of space between them. Not all cabanas are always 12 by 12. We're automatically assuming that someone's gonna put up the maximum size to make a stall. And what if someone comes in with just a smaller?
I think we have to go by the maximum.
And
We
I'm,
have to-
I'm fine with that. I'm just saying, I haven't gone out there to actually tape off and measure to see
Yeah.
if it is actually 9 of them that could fit, or if is it 8, or is it 10?
But the
or-
basic premise is a 60-40 split
Mhm.
with some number that needs to be validated between
Right.
those walkways.
Yeah, because we basically know it's not gonna be over 12 foot. I mean, if you got 4 12 foots and then some citizen comes out there and puts a 10 foot up, that 2 space is not gonna give either way. We're gonna
Right.
we can only have so many in each area, basically. I mean,
Right.
that would be a way to control it, and still give our citizens or our visitors who have their own opportunity to get prime spaces out there.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
So what we really haven't calculated is the 30-foot easement sort of between, each walkway has 30 foot, so we don't know
Right.
whether he
When I was reading through
calculated
his
that in there.
analysis, I don't know if he accounted for that
Yeah.
or not. So this is kind of, it's not at the very top of our ordinances when he said he cursory looked at it.
So we essentially will end up with some type of a matrix that identifies where each one of these access ways are, and we will, for each one of those, designate
A certain
how
number of slots.
how many commercial versus private citizen vendors could go into each one of those areas, and give that information to the beach patrol as well as the vendors, so that the beach patrols can keep this in order. Got that, Joe? Is that really what we want to do?
I don't know, sounds good to me.
Well, that's where I just kind of go back to, again, if we can get to the point where we have the permitting process and just limit the number of vendors and the number of cabanas that each vendor is allowed to put up, then the locations may shift over time throughout the summer, week to week, based on whether they're being rented or not. But that takes the burden off of our public safety and having to count cabanas and where they're located every day. So that's where I think, again, the permitting, excuse me, the permitting process with a set number of cabanas per vendor is the way to go there. And then if we have a permit situation in place, and let's say a vendor starts to place more than they should, then we have the ability to revoke that permit at that point. So that's ultimately, again, what gives us the control.
So are you saying that they could put them all in one space?
I mean, they'd have to follow the spacing of the rules that we have currently. But I think as people are renting them from the vendors, again, I haven't done a study on it, but I think it would even out across the beach at some level. Now, sometimes they may be more dense in one location than others, but over time, I think it's a more efficient way to manage than to say every beach access, and heaven forbid, there's different lengths and different amounts that could go between each beach access. So this one has 9, this one has 8, this one has 7. I mean, that's going to be a disaster to try to manage.
No, I'm not suggesting that, but I just think that you need to have some space remaining for the citizens that want a specific location near the walkway
Right.
where they're renting.
And I agree with that as well. So that's, trying to find the balance is the tough part.
I'm not sure Again, I think we would have to know how many spaces we have available, and we have to leave enough room percentage-wise for our citizens and property
No, I
owners.
agree with that as well.
So therefore, you would need to figure the amount of cabanas each vendor could have by what you have available and the percentage that you're going to allow vendors to use.
I agree.
Okay.
But if we take, just to start the process, John Farrell's 360 cabana spaces, you use the 60-40 split and round down a little bit, we're talking about roughly 200 cabanas for vendors, right? And then we also can tell the guidance, and the vendors would have to sign up to this, that they are on a first-come, first-served basis, but essentially in between these areas, there's only 60% of them could be vendors and 40% between each walkway. We kind of,
Let me
there's
ask,
some work to do to figure out exactly how to do that.
Yeah, of course.
let me ask y'all this, if we come up with that, based on this 200 vendors, and we come up with a permit, could we not set up a time, a certain date that the permits have to be bought, and then go back, and if you've got 4, then you know they can basically have up to 50 spots per vendor. If we only had 4 and they had 200 spots, we could split it up like that. If we had 6, then we'd break it down from there. Would that make a little sense, and actually have the end to get the permit be a certain time? And once those permits are sold, if we have 4 vendors, those 4 vendors are there through the season.
Correct.
Yeah.
Do y'all think that might be something we could look forward to or look into?
Well, I think that would be a pretty easy way to do it.
I mean, if we, I honestly don't know, from what I have read back into and looked in, I virtually feel like we'll have at least 4 vendors. We possibly could pick up a few more from other towns, I don't know. But if we have a certain date that the permit has to be bought by the vendors, then that takes care of that. I mean, nobody can just come in, in the middle of June and say, well, now I want to be a vendor. No, because we have a law, and this is what we said, and this is what's done. Come back next year. And then go from there. And then we could set up the number of spaces that are available. If each, like I said, if it was 4 and there's 200, and each one has they have access to 50 spots.
So one concern that pops up in my mind is if the vendors are all working different areas of the beach, and they're trying to plan ahead for out in months in advance and taking, orders now for sometime in July. And within a given area, they're only allowed 60% of the space. And let's say one vendor all of a sudden is taking orders, but his order or her order takes up 50% of the space in that given location where they want it delivered to or what have you. And there's another similar vendor who's not communicative with the other one, and they also take orders for 50% of the allotted cabana spaces within a given stretch of beach. So then they're essentially double booked. And then how do you handle those sorts of issues? So if kind of like my thought is, again, and I'm trying to model this off of what I've seen done in South Carolina, and if we're able to do it in North Carolina, we have to figure that out. But you could say, okay, we're going to allow 4 vendors. You do a bidding process. That way the town receives revenue. You could set up 4 distinct locations of the beach, okay? Then you could say, okay, the highest bidder gets to pick which location they want to work, okay? So then the second highest bidder picks up the next location, third picks the next location, fourth picks the fourth, okay? At that point, in the wintertime, when they go to take those orders, they know the percentage of cabanas that they're actually allowed to fill based on those given streets that they're going to be functioning within, and that those other vendors can't function within that same area. Because that way, they know what 60% is of their allotted space that they could do it.
The only problem I see with that is a vendor gets an order for a cabana between 28th and 29th Street, but that's not his area. I guess that's for them to work out.
It's all
Well,
driven by the customer, it's not.
We have vendors setting up, not necessarily where Uh,
But the
We
renter
have
wants
vendors
it-
setting up for people that don't live in this town, period. We have people coming from other beaches using cabanas. And they probably don't care which area it's in. So we have a lot of that, quite frankly.
Well, I don't see any way we can say if you're not renting a property or live in Sunset Beach, that you can't have a cabana.
No, I'm not suggesting that.
No, I know you weren't, but I'm just trying to think it out, and, you know, if there was some way to do it, I'd be for it.
Well, how about if we charge a fee per day for a cabana?
What do you mean? That we would charge the people that are renting the cabana a fee? I'm not sure what you
No,
mean.
we would charge the vendor a $5 fee per day.
But isn't?
He'll
what the
pass that
permit-
on to the customer, of course.
But
Well-
isn't that what the permit does?
No. The permit is a one-time fee.
Okay.
Well,
But
if I,
that still doesn't address the issue of how many vendors in which location, and do we try to control which areas that they work in?
I think
I mean-
they're gonna have to work that out amongst themselves.
I think we set a number of tents or cabanas that could be put up there. I'm not sure exactly how we go about and determine what is a commercially viable number of cabanas for each company to have so that they can actually be worth buying the equipment, putting them out there, setting up a reservation system and doing all that kind of stuff. So I'm kind of hesitant in terms of, you know, how do we go about picking the right number of companies? But once we pick the companies, once we've determined which number of companies and how many cabanas they could put up and how many total, then I think it's the vendors as private business to figure out where they're gonna put it, how they're gonna put it. If we wanna put one more layer of complication in and say in each particular space between a walkway, 60% of them only 60% of them be commercial, that's one other factor that they have to worry about. You can see these guys getting out there at 7 o'clock in the morning, duking it out, trying to get that last space, you know, which is
Well,
not good for us either.
if we have a limited number that each vendor can put up, it may not be his first choice of the space he wants to put it. He can put it in another area where there's less than 60% vendor erected that day.
Okay.
I mean,
I'm not-
I don't think it's possible at all to guarantee a vendor he's going to get his choice of the space he puts it.
But
Yeah.
then that's hard for them to plan in advance and take orders
Yeah.
in the off-season. So if they can't be guaranteed, like say somebody's renting a house and they want a cabana at the end of that street, if there's already more than 60%, then they go down there and there's no cabana. So then that makes the vendor look bad to the public because then they.
Well, they just have to walk a little bit further.
Yeah.
And that's what's been going on anyway.
I'm
I-
really not sure if the market supports the numbers that we're talking about. Not this past season, but the previous season when the vendors could put them up. I regularly walk the beaches, and on 4th of July, I made a unscientific effort to count, and I ended up with somewhere between 200 and 225 cabanas between 40th and 18th. And that was about as crowded that I've seen it. Memorial Day doesn't come quite that close, but gets crowded. Labor Day gets crowded.
There was,
Second week of June does too.
Yeah. Now, and I'm not sure, other people may have done some counts too.
they have,
Okay, and what kind of numbers do they come up with?
over 300.
I've never come, in the 3.5, 4 years that I've been counting, I've not come close to any one of those days. Granted, I
Two-
didn't go out
2
there every
years
day,
ago, there were some days that there were over 300 cabanas on the beach. Now, I don't know if they were all vendor cabanas. They could have been private cabanas as well.
Well, with not,
But
the numbers
I'm
I'm
just
using is
saying,
just cabanas. The ones that I saw were just
with
cabanas.
with that being said, if we say, like I said with John's thing, we're looking at, you saying, you know, basically we thinking, or we're looking like we may have up to 360 spots.
that's
So even
right.
at 300, we still have some space there. We still have some area. The main thing we need to figure out is how many are gonna be, we're gonna have to come up with a number and say this will be for our vendors to make sure we do leave enough for the visitors and for the homeowners that
Right.
have them. And now we basically talking about getting to where we're gonna put them. Are we gonna limit, you can only put so many in this area and so many in this area? Or is it a block or a section? I mean, I guess we gotta figure that out, correct?
It sounds like a lot of work for staff. You know, even though I voted yes to allow the vendors to erect the canopies on the beach, I still have mixed feelings about it, based on the actions I saw 2 years ago. Now, we're letting them back on, but we're making sure now we have rules, and it's up to us to enforce the rules. You know, if they can't work it out among themselves, if you get two vendors out there fighting, and you fine each of them $250, and you take their permits,
Yeah.
or maybe give them one warning, then okay, give them two warnings, and the third violation.
If it's
they
in
go.
our rules, that's the warning.
Right. I don't disagree with that.
Yeah, the two-strike rule would probably agree. I mean, if they've made two mistakes, then definitely that third time they should be stripped of their permit.
Okay, so I don't know that we're gonna solve the how many here today, but, yes, we want a permitting process. Yes, it needs to be some form of allocation between private and commercial. We've already got the spacing and things figured out in terms of what size cabana and what space between them, so it is self-limiting. You can't put any more cabanas there than what the rules there allow, so I think we should move on to not figuring out how many permits and how many vendors at this point. We should validate the number of spaces, certainly the way that John did, just make sure that that is correct. There's some other things that we need to talk about here, I think. The way that the customers rent, it's been suggested that because some of the visitors will rent by the week, yet they don't spend every day down at the beach. So there's cabanas there that are sitting not used, and I don't know whether that really happens that frequently or not. There's been a suggestion that they get rented by the day rather than the week. I don't know how practical that is. Does anyone have any thoughts about that aspect?
That would pretty much purely, at least the way it exists right now, it pretty much purely depend on the vendor themselves, what they can manage. And I think most of them have gone to primarily doing rentals by the week because it's such a complicated process to try to do 1 days at a
Yeah.
time, or I'm gonna do, I wanna rent for 2 days and then not for 2 days and then rent for another day. And so I think most vendors have gone by default to doing weekly rentals.
Yeah, I think so
I
too.
would be- I
Why,
just
why
think it
are
would-
we worrying so much about the vendors and not our citizens?
But we can
Our
worry about.
citizens are the ones that are suffering
The
from this.
the vendors are the ones that rent the cabanas to, audience number one are the visitors who are renting houses on the island and paying the accommodation tax and want to have a cabana put up there, and, you know, whether it's because they're too lazy to put it up, or they're physically unable to put it up, or, you know, whatever it happens to be. So the vendors have a market, a service that they provide to put the cabanas up on the beach. That's why we're talking about the vendors, and we're trying to control manage how they do that in such a way that we have a balance on the islands.
In 2016, I was on that beach every day for at least 5 weeks, getting people to sign a petition to not have each end of our island de-annexed. We collected over 5,000 signatures. I happen to know for sure that we have people coming to rent cabanas on our beach, coming from Ocean Isle Beach, coming from Calabash, coming from Little River, and other places. Now, those people don't pay accommodation tax.
But is your only opposition that they don't pay the accommodation tax? I mean, there's still, we can't.
That's why I'm suggesting
We cannot control
a
and keep
day
people from
fee.
other islands coming.
I know that. The
Yeah.
beach is public.
Yeah.
And then we also give them a free place to park.
Well, I don't think we should over-regulate the vendors or make it so that they say, well, it's not worth it, because there is a need for the cabanas. Who knows, hundreds of emails. The people who wanted cabanas because they were old and they couldn't put them up, or they worried about health issues, skin cancer, or they had small children. I don't want us to over-regulate.
40 years, we had those same problems. 40 years ago, we got along just fine.
Well,
I don't
among
know.
other
10 years
things, you
ago.
couldn't get on an
10
island on
years
a
ago.
daily basis conveniently. 40 years ago, you had to take the swing bridge. Yeah, I think when we get past, one, we're gonna give a permit to the vendors, and by doing a permit to the vendors, we can have rules that they have to abide by in terms of their behavior, their conduct, the times, how they label their cabanas and all of that. We can set a guideline on a limit of how many commercial vended cabanas we could have on the island at any one given time. Whatever that cap happens to be, whether 200 is a good number or not. And then perhaps we could limit the number of cabanas any one particular vendor could put up. After that, I think, you know, supply and demand is what drives how they manage things and what they do, and that kind of takes care of themselves. And we enforce the rules that they're in the right place, they're set up properly, the tents are properly labeled if they're commercial vendor tents, so that if there is a problem, we can address that with the right place and move on. But when we get down to who gets how much of which space, which side of the island they can get on, and those types of things, I think we're getting way too down in the weeds.
I would like to see us receive some income from this so that it offsets some of the some of the money that our taxpayers pay for the monitoring of the beach. It's our taxpayers that pay that.
Using the
There.
accommodation tax. The accommodation tax supports the tourism, the marketing, and that type of thing, and that's where the majority of that fund comes out, if I recall that correctly.
Yes,
Is
sir.
it? Yeah. So that's not directly it's not our property taxes that do it. It's the people who rent on the islands and in the mainland, Sea Trail and the other places. Those accommodation taxes are what pay for our beach patrol for most of the maintenance of what we do out there on the beach. So, it would be nice, yes, to get a little bit of income from that, but I don't think that should be the driving factor.
I don't think it
But
should
if
be
we
the
do-
driving factor
if we-
either,
if
but
we
I think
do-
it would be nice to receive some income.
But if we do a permit to the vendors, that would be a basis to charge them a fee for their permit.
Well, if you've got 4 vendors, and it's $500 each, that's $2,000. $5 a day per cabana comes up to a lot more than that.
And who's going to keep track of that?
It would be up to the vendor.
And then, so essentially, it would be an honor system in terms of them paying it to us.
We have beach patrol out there, how many hours a day? They can count.
The beach patrol would go through and take inventory of all the vendors' tents every day and write a report, send that into to the chief, and then he sends it into
Are we not putting that in our
finance person.
rules?
Pardon?
We're putting that in our rules, right? That each vendor has so many spaces? So that's a rule that's going to be that Beach Patrol is going to have to verify that they're abiding by it. Is that not the case?
We need to, maybe we need to check with our chief or assistant chief, and see what their thoughts are on this. Every year at budget time, we get complaints, you're spending all this money for beach patrol, and Ocean Isle Beach only spends some really low amount. I'd like to hear from them what they're able to do. Will they need more manpower?
If we charge a fee, that may offset some of it.
I just think that a daily accounting of that is just an accounting nightmare. I mean, to keep track of it and make sure that it's happening, to actually collect it, I think that would be quite difficult to do and keep track of. I think that the annual permit should cover that, and whatever we charge for that should account for whatever those costs are. Yes, we need the beach patrol to be looking to see that we've got the right number of cabanas out there, but that's a quick check. I mean, they're not checking to see who it is and whether they've paid a fee that day. I just think that a daily accounting on that is just going to be a nightmare.
If you could charge the people from Little River or Ocean Isle Beach or Calabash that come here and put up a tent, if you could charge them a daily fee, that would be fair. I remember years ago, my wife and I went down to Georgia, and we went on. It was one of those very popular islands, and you had to pay the toll to come on the island, to go on the island. And then when you got there, you want to take a walk on a beach access, to see the ocean and what the beach was like there was no place to park.
That's the problem with barrier islands, with so many people wanting to occupy
Oh, yeah.
barrier island. It has a carrying capacity,
But
and
I
sometimes
don't,
it gets overloaded.
but that means setting up a toll booth, you have people to man that, and then need your ID, okay, you're coming from Little River or wherever, and you have a cabana in your car, now you're gonna have to pay this much. There's no way to regulate who brings a cabana on the beach, not unless we hire a whole lot of people and
And-
spend a lot of money.
Then maybe we don't need cabanas on the beach, period.
I understand the position that there are people coming from Ocean Island, Little River, and things like that, but realistically, what's the proportion of people coming from there versus people who are here paying the accommodations tax and the sales taxes and things like that that are contributing to our economy in the day-to-day operations of these cabanas going up? Is it 50%,
This summer, take
3%?
take a ride down Main Street and look at the tags.
Right, but that doesn't all mean they're using cabanas. And if it's not cabanas, they could be using umbrellas. So if they're coming here for the shade of Sunset Beach, by not allowing cabanas, then they may do the same thing with the umbrellas. And just because there's a car on the road with a tag that isn't from Sunset Beach, that doesn't necessarily mean they're renting the cabanas out.
There's not a problem with umbrellas. There's not a problem with umbrellas. In fact, that's what most of the cabana companies are going to.
Right, but so what you're telling us, though, is that if cabanas are allowed on the beach, that's going to bring people in from other towns. I don't consider that a bad thing.
I don't think it's a bad thing either. But when it inconveniences property owners that are paying very high taxes in this town, it's not fair to the citizens of this town.
Well,
My
they're paying
understanding-
taxes, but our property taxes are not in the category of very high. I mean, so we've got
My unders-
reasonably low property taxes here in Sunset Beach, just to keep us on a straight and level path.
My understanding is that because the beach is a public trust, that you can't differentiate between one's from Ocean Isle, one's from here.
No,
They're all citizens of North Carolina.
no, you
and they all-
can't. No, you can't.
So I don't
No,
know.
I agree. You can't do that.
So,
I agree.
so I don't know what you're suggesting here in terms of people coming from other towns. I don't think you can differentiate.
I'm not trying to keep people from other towns coming here. I'm just saying our citizens bear the burden of what issues the cabanas cause for our beach. It's our citizens that bear that burden.
Okay, well, I don't know what to do with that.
But I'm just one vote.
I know. So do we need to decide whether we're gonna charge a daily fee or an annual fee at this point, or?
Mr. Mayor, can you call
I would
that?
say that we should either set either a flat rate fee, or if y'all wanna look into that daily fee, then we need to do that. But we need to get something in order so we can go ahead and get these ordinance set up, so at least these vendors will know what they're gonna be working with, correct?
Well, absolutely. I don't know if a motion is out of order, but, at this point, but I would make a motion that there's no daily fee.
Do I have a second?
Or that there's an annual fee?
Oh, no, there's no, I said no daily fee.
So why don't we try to put things in a positive light, that we will set a one-time seasonal fee
Right.
per vendor.
That would be fine.
I mean, and just clear it, a one-time seasonal fee, still to be determined.
So is that the
That
motion?
eliminates the daily.
So
I
we
would-
wanna scratch that motion
I
and come
withdraw
back
my
in with a-
motion.
Yes.
Yeah, I move that we set a one-time daily fee, I'm sorry. Excuse me. I move that we set a one-time seasonal fee per vendor,
Second,
period.
second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Aye, okay.
Did you say yes or no?
I said
She
aye.
said yes, yes, so we're gonna have a flat yearly fee, that is one thing that we're gonna write down for this, for vendors, this is for vendors.
Yeah.
Do y'all want to go over, if we're doing permits, are every vendors allowed to sign up for permits, or are you gonna cap the number of vendors that can receive permits?
Does anybody know how many vendors we had out there when they were allowed?
What about a lottery system? Let the vendors put in bids and the highest four.
I think we
Get
had
the
7 or 8,
contract.
we had 7 or 8 vendors come to the vendors meeting last year, didn't we? When we were trying to,
I don't know, it was hard to tell, we had some public members show, just
Yeah,
citizens show
but I
up too,
thought that-
so.
yeah.
I think we pretty much know there's gonna be at least 4. I think we pretty much know that from ones that are, that already have been putting out information that they are gonna be trying to be a vendor for our town. So we know for sure 4. And then it's just if we draw some from any other places, maybe even vendors that hadn't been here before, or, are they gonna try to come in? So do we need to look at putting a set number of, we take 6 vendors and that's it? Or
Well-
7 vendors, or 8 vendors, or whatever.
if we're going to specify a max number of cabanas any vendor can have, we would sort of have to limit the number of vendors, I would think.
So let's say like
You
if
know.
we, if we've got 200 and there's 4, of course, 50 would be not necessarily they got 50, but that would be the relative number that they couldn't go across. But then if you're looking at 6, then you're splitting it down, 35, basically, because that's 195.
In,
If I can throw in some 2 cents here, unsolicited. Some of the driving force for why people wanted to see less vendor installations in the past had been to reduce the number of cabanas out there in general, period. By limiting the number of permits available and then capping the number of tents that they're allowed to set up, that would achieve that goal. So just from, they may only have 20 contracts this week, they may have 30 next week, they may only have 10 this week. By not trying to dole out every 200, unless that's the way you want to go. I'm just saying if part of the goal was also to reduce the footprint, so to speak, being used on the beach, that their numbers just based on their rentals would do that over time if they have a cap. But by trying to dole out every 200 and split it up amongst like 8 vendors, one vendor may not only have like 2 customers. And then that cheats another vendor out of like another, 10 customers they may have had. So, I know it's complex and there's a lot to work through, but, if we're gonna limit the number of vendors, then I say that you give them the maximum amount of possible tents, but not so much so that you hamstring their business.
how about this? How about, once we figure out for sure how many spaces, we decide how many vendors we're gonna allow, and then do it by lottery.
Or a first come, first serve. If you're gonna do a lottery, it all depends how you wanna set that lottery up. Someone mentioned bidding before. If you're gonna do bidding, then you shouldn't do an annual permit fee. If several vendors are gonna be drawn from a hat lottery, or I think a first come, first serve business model is more appropriate. It's more commonplace in America too, so.
Could this be mentioned? From what I've read through some of these vendors that are putting out information, the majority of them say, with being able to get help in and their problems with looking people to set them up, that basically, if they set 30 up a day, that's about the limit they're gonna be able to do. I don't think, if we got 200 spaces and we don't have 4 vendors, I don't see them a lot of times, unless maybe it's like July the 4th, second week in June, those big weeks that they would actually even go up into that number. I guess if they put 30 up, most of them, that's about all they're gonna be able to do. Like I said, July the 4th, that's a whole different monster. But other than that, majority weeks, I mean, from a vendor standpoint, from a business standpoint, they've got to make sure that they have the people out there to put them up. And they're not going to overbook themselves because they know if they do, they're never going to get out. And then you're going to have less satisfied customers, which leads to your business going down.
I've sort of thinking through another type of option is, if we got, just using the number of 200, if we permit in terms of 10 Cabana packages with a limit of, 3 packages or 4 packages per vendor, then the vendors themselves can determine whether they think they can do 20 tents a week for the season, or whether they can do up to, say, 40 tents a week for the season.
That would be basically saying that here's our
And then-
fee, here's how many you get with this fee. If you think your company's gonna do 3 fees, 3, which would be 30, you would pay 3 permit fees. So
That-
basically permitting per the number of tents each section out. Is that what you're saying?
I was with you, I
10.
was with you until that each section out bit.
All right,
Yeah,
you said,
yeah.
all right, say 10, well, let's say 20.
Well, I said, set up a 10 Cabana package, and then the vendor can, we could say, limit up to either 3 or 4 packages, so that would give them 30 to 40 tents that they could do, depending on how many permits they want to
Just want to
purchase.
say that permit is per, if it's $500, I'm just using
Yeah.
these numbers. If it's $500 and that includes 10 spots.
That gives them
And
10
vendor
10
vendor
tents.
Joe he thinks he can put up 30 a week, so he's gonna pay $1,500. He is
Something-
guaranteed 30 spots.
Yeah, along that line.
Yeah.
And then the vendors themselves, based on the size of their business, could
Then they can
determine,
figure out exactly how many spots they think they
determine what
need.
they want.
Are we
Yeah.
not going to have to police that?
We're gonna police whatever we set up. That's
Right.
what we've
Yeah,
been
anything
saying.
we hadn't come
and
up with
that's-
is probably gonna have to be
Yeah,
looked into
yeah.
on
I mean, we're
Right.
talking
not a
about
daily, but a regular check.
making
Yeah.
sure that they have clear labeling on their cabanas, so that
Well, that's
just by
definitely something we
driving,
can, that's
Yeah.
something we can look at
By
putting in numbers
driving
too, that
by,
they have to be marked.
counts could be made and things like that.
Makes sense to me.
That sound good to y'all?
Me as well.
I mean, that would, like I said, even what John says by 10, and like I said, because each one knows what they're capable of putting up.
Yeah.
Each company that comes in, regardless if you got 4 vendors or you got 8 vendors, they know the manpower that they have and how many they got rented. They'll know that pretty much coming up.
Yeah.
Well, now, if we come up with something like that, then we need to sort of set up a date that we need to have those permits in by, correct? A cutoff time. So, and not only to help us, but to help the vendors, so they'll know and can get prepared for that, whether they've got to order more tent, or more canopies, or less canopies, or, I want to be fair to the business, and then again, I want to always look out for our citizens. And by doing this, from what we've seen and what we've heard and what we've read, a lot of visitors that come in here really need this. A lot of people that live in this town, I know for a fact, because I went to their houses, there's a lot of elderly people in this town that are really glad that this is coming back into, because they're not able to come in. Not all of them, but some of them. And they may use them 1 week a year, they may use them 5 weeks a year, we don't know that. But that's up to the vendor to handle that.
Yep.
But if we set up a good thing, like you said, and Joe down here, he thinks he's got 30 a week, well, Bill over here, he might not, he knows he can't do but 20 a week. So he only has to buy 2 permits.
No, it makes sense.
As long as they stay in that,
Yeah.
I mean, I think it would work good both for the vendors and for the town, because we would know to be able to keep up with the number that we actually put out there, and we still have this much numbers available for and if we do that, and we sold those permits like that, they may only need 150 spaces. Then that's gonna leave all that other space for our citizens. But we know at the end of the day, we know we've only got 200 spaces. So if at 10, we would have 20 spots available. Once them 20 spots available, our hands are tied. That's all we've got. That's all the room we have.
Sold. It's sold.
So,
It's sold.
I,
sound
I
good to
agree,
y'all?
I agree. I would just like to add that we should have a start date and a cutoff date for the vendors.
Well,
I mean,
And I may be wrong about this, because I'm not a vendor, but I would say by the most of the things going on out there, the Memorial Day to Labor Day is pretty much your thing. I mean, that is pretty much the
no,
period
I mean, when they submit their application for however many
Yeah.
they want. I would suggest that you have a date that you start accepting those and a date that you end accepting
Well, you know,
those.
that would be easy. To me, it would be easy because if you put in, we're gonna advertise it May the 1st, you can start, and May
Right.
the 15th is the deadline. And
Yeah,
that's it.
I agree.
And, you know, if we have 120 spaces at least, that's it. I mean, there won't be no more coming in.
Well, yeah, that's what I meant, have a
Okay,
start
okay.
date and an end
Yes,
date.
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
But
Sorry.
then is it first come, first served within that, or are we gonna do a lottery?
Well, you
We-
can't buy more than 3, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that would be what we have to set up also.
Right. I think that,
I mean-
I think that
Yeah.
should be a limit. There should be a limit to how many you can,
Yeah, I agree that, but whether it's 3 or 4, I mean,
It's
I
yet to
don't
be
know what you-
determined because we have
Yeah.
to see how many spots we got.
Right.
first.
yeah.
Well, now, if they say, I want 3 permits, which would be 30 tents, are they stuck with that number all summer?
yes.
Yeah, it's an annual permit.
Annual fee, yes, sir.
I'm just thinking about May and early June. No, okay, I'm good with that.
I'm good.
So do we want to sort of go with that type deal?
It's
As
fine
far
with
as
me.
dividing it up,
Yep, fine
selling
with
each
me.
individual permit for that amount of spaces?
Yep.
That sound
Yeah,
good?
now, the other question then becomes, you know, if we're selling the permits. If you're selling permits for 10 tents at a time, you know, is $500 for the annual permit appropriate? Because if we were doing just 4 vendors, like earlier in the conversation,
Mhm.
and we're doing $500 each, then they're getting 50 tents for 500, you know, so.
But I think if we go with what
I
you
think it's-
suggested, and they only get 10, if they only buy 3 permits, they only get 30 instead of 50. And if at the end of the permit period, we only have, you know, May the 15th, say, and you have 20 spots basically at 10 if we have 200.
Yeah.
And
My,
if we
my
don't-
question is $500 a reasonable cost for a package of 10 tents? Or should
Yes.
it
Well,
be
you-
something like $250 for a
Well,
package
I
of 10
don't,
tents?
if you can put
That's-
up 50 tents and at an annual fee of $500, and now you can only put up at the maximum 30 tents, and that fee would be $1,500, that seems awfully unfair to me.
I mean, one of the things we're gonna do this, hate to say this out loud, I mean, we need to make it realistic in terms of what a vendor business can handle to do the business. And if we put the price up so high, then we chase away the
Well,
vendors.
let me give you this suggestion. You talking 10 tents, correct? We're
Yeah.
talking 10 tents. Our period between Memorial Day and Labor Day is virtually 100 days.
108 this year.
But, you know, virtually at least 100. All right, if we're going from there, then you count that, if that permit's divided into that, they've got 100 days at putting out 10 tents. And you divide that into 100, what is it gonna be, $5 per week, basically? Or per 10? The time they get out with all the days that they
Yeah,
put them
but I
out?
mean, the realistic thing, I would guess that the vendors do not sell out their tents
No.
every day of the summertime.
What do they
I mean, the
charge?
houses don't sell out their tents every day of the summertime.
What do they charge per week,
I don't know, I
per,
stopped,
per tent?
I don't know.
Yeah, you
Because
have-
to me, you need to make it
Yeah.
like a
You have-
10% or something
have-
of that fee.
You have a
Yeah.
vendor here.
Can we ask a vendor, what do you charge a week?
May I?
Yeah,
You know, there's currently 4 or 5 vendors between $250 and $300 is what's been historic.
Ask him some other questions too and benefit from this information.
But, you know, every vendor is subject to, every man's his own boss, so. But, like, in whatever last year I could do it was $250 is what I charged, but there was somebody out there, I think at $175.
250 per week?
Yes, ma'am.
If I may, real quick, also, if we are gonna have people speak, they need to come up to the microphone. Secondly, y'all had not established the fee for the annual, y'all just threw out 500 earlier,
Yeah.
and no one
Yeah,
confirmed
we
it.
just use them numbers.
But what I'm saying is, breaking down 50 tents for 500 was never established. You can't really base your math for less
Yeah.
tents based
Yeah.
on something that didn't occur and isn't being applied. So
Yeah.
it's broken math is what I'm getting at.
My point
A different
is,
route may be
if we're gonna have packages, we need to set a reasonable permit fee.
Right, but what I'm saying is utilizing a non-existent standard isn't a way to break that down, so.
So,
Didn't know if there was anything else that,
so if it's $250 a week,
Well, first, can you give us your name and address?
yeah,
Yes, sir.
sorry, David Dowda, my,
He drawled up, he thought you was gonna grab him.
That was last night.
Yeah, my cabana business is actually on the island. I have an island location at Julie's Rentals. It's 424 Sunset Boulevard South. And yeah, last couple or 2 years ago, we charged $250 for the week.
so if it's $250 a week, that means for a season from June through August, that's $3,000 per season, let's say, per tent.
If you, I mean, you know, if you rent it out every week.
Right, no,
Sure.
I understand. So, times 10, right? Because that's the group that we were talking about, $30,000 for a group of 10. So,
At a max,
at a max.
at a max, assuming you rent them out all the time and you,
Which is unrealistic.
It's unrealistic. What's your usual
Yeah, I mean, so,
occupation rate?
right. So, I mean, we're normally
Occupancy.
maxed out in July. And that's it.
Oh, July only?
Right, and of course, that max depends on how many employees, which I'm here to tell you is, it's really hard to find somebody that can work from 6 to 9 a.m. or 7, and then come back at
Right.
4:30, and then potentially, you know, if the wind gets up, we have a responsibility during the day
Right.
to find that kind of labor. I mean, so, you know, to have 4 guys, which each guy is really only capable of 6 or 7 cabanas, so I mean, you're talking. I've never, in my 5 years of doing this, ever done more than 30 some in a week, and that was brutal. And I think I probably do more than the other companies, humbly.
When you say 30-something a week, you mean 30 cabanas per week?
That like July 4th week, that 1 week, at the height, the most I've ever done was like 32. And
That's each day.
correct, yes, ma'am. Sunday through Friday, and that's not sustained through. I'd say a good average. The second week in June is typically when kids get out of school.
Right.
That week until about the second week in August, until they go back. Those weeks, I'd say an average is about 20, 25. And so if there's even 5, 6 vendors all doing 25, you're talking 125, 150. If there are, let's just say 300 on the beach, then that's about 50-50. And I know for a fact that all of the companies aren't doing 25. So
Well,
Well,
I do think the $500 per 10 is too stiff. I support business in this town, and I support small business, and this is probably as small a business as you get, and I don't want to discourage them. Okay, I don't want to give them a free ride, but I want them to say, I don't want them to say it's not worth it.
and there are, you know, obviously the costs of doing business when you figure my business is April to October, and my costs are really high. My leases that I pay, now obviously not everybody is like in my situation, but leases I pay are 12 months. And I have rent all year. I only make money for those 6 months. And so that's the case for everyone, at least, that they only make money for a certain amount of time. And so, I understand a permitting process, if that's the route that you all choose. I would hope to keep that as low as possible. I don't really, we pay taxes just like anybody else, and so I would like to see that be as low as possible. It's not even if it was $500 and you make $2,000. I mean, that's making revenue off of that permit to cover costs. I mean, I just don't see that as a viable revenue source. And so I understand a permitting process for accountability reasons. If some vendor is speeding consistently or not obeying the laws, not setting it up, then that whatever process y'all use to hold people accountable, I understand that. But to make that then also $500, $1,000, $1,500, $2,000, I just don't see the reason why it would need to be that high. I mean, if it was $50 for that permit, whatever it was, the point is the accountability. That's the reason for the permit. It's not to generate revenue. It's to hold us accountable. And I'm all for accountability. And I have the most to lose. I have a business on the island. And so I want to see us accountable. I want Cabanas to be out there. It generates me more revenue. So I'm all for accountability. I just think that it sounds like, at that point, we're just trying to generate revenue, and I understand. From my standpoint, I have a small business. It's just me, so.
Okay, appreciate what you said.
Thank you, sir.
Yep.
Thank you.
So what kind of fee y'all wanna think about this more, or y'all wanna come up with a fee and let's
I-
vote
we-
on it, or?
Let's come up with something today.
$100 per 10-tent package. Generates $2,000 if we sold if we still based on 200 tents. Yeah.
Well, I was thinking more like 150, but that would, if we were gonna charge 500, that was for the year, and this would be coming in weekly.
No, it's a
Or
one,
year.
it's a one-shot permit, one for this whole season. It's not a weekly permit
Annual.
or a daily, it's just once a year.
Yeah.
That's right.
And we don't have to hire anybody to handle that all year long.
You say 150, he says 50.
I said
No,
100.
he said
I said
100.
100. I said 100.
Okay.
If,
You
if we
said
were-
50, he said 150, I said 100, we'll average out to 100.
Yeah.
if we were gonna charge 500, and we all agreed on that, I think we did, then if it was 150 per 10, and you got the max, 3 packages, that's 450. And that takes us closer to to what we would have gotten.
Well, the 500 was just a hypothetical
It was an
number that
arbitrary number.
the
That was
mayor
just something
threw
to
out at
base
the
off
beginning
of.
of the conversation.
I agree with Councilman Nern.
You, Councilman, y'all got any input?
I could go either way. I think that the point that the gentleman made, that this is to ensure accountability, not a revenue-making proposition. It needs to be something to ensure that we have vendors that are serious, I think, about what we're trying to do. I think 100 to 150 is a reasonable number. I could go either way. I mean, whichever. If we want to go with 150, I could go with that.
I can go with 150 as well.
Jamie, use your mic.
I can go with 150 as well.
Do I have a motion then that we set the fees at $150 per 10 tents, or tent canopies?
So moved.
Do I have a
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
All right. Next up, one of the questions or the statements that you had was looking at, should there be an adjustment from the 7 a.m. setup time to the 7 p.m. takedown time? Do we have any discussion at looking into that?
What I've heard is sort of two sides. I've heard that people who live on the beach would like 8 or 9 o'clock as a setup time so they don't get disturbed. I've heard vendors say, let's do it at 6 o'clock so we can get it out there before the other folks come out. 7 o'clock was put in several years ago, partly in concern with, that was the same time that we have set for when construction can start on the island, is kind of keep all the noise
To a minimum?
down to a reasonable number. Part of the issue had, people were complaining that the folks that were setting up the tents were loud and noisy and sometimes argumentative and stuff like that. And whether they do it at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock is not going to change that very much. I think 7 o'clock time is a good time.
I agree with that.
What time do we allow construction?
I think right now we're allowing 8:30 in the summertime and 8 o'clock in the wintertime, right?
No,
No,
7, 8.
7:30?
7 o'clock.
Okay,
7
I'm
o'clock.
sorry, 7 to 7:30?
7
It's
o'clock.
lawn equipment that's 8 o'clock.
What's 8 o'clock?
Lawn equipment.
Lawn. Yeah.
Landscapers and whatnot can't start until 8 or 8:30.
So one other thing I've heard is that, for vacationers, that some of them feel that 7 o'clock, like they feel like they have to be out there early to try to beat the vendors at 7, and that's, if on vacation, that's a difficulty for them. It's just one of the things that has been mentioned to me. So one consideration regarding this, and just throwing it out there, would be to go from maybe 8 to 6 to follow the similar statutes as like the dog walking. So it's an hour later. Beaches still theoretically aren't that crowded at that point, but then also for people coming into town, it's just one less thing that they have to try to figure out. It just matches another statute that's already in place. Just throwing that out there.
I'm wondering about, is it safer to have an earlier start time? So, I mean, there's people out there as soon as it gets light, biking, walking, whatever. Would it be safer to have an earlier start so there's less people out there walking or biking when these guys are legally parking and taking their cabanas to the beach?
Also, haven't we discussed this earlier and basically said this was a thing, at looking at the percentage in the zones, correct? So if the vendors were out there, where you're talking about people coming, they don't get the good spots, but if we limit the zones and they can only put so many up, that's gonna leave some spots open in those areas.
Sure.
Yep.
And we've already, passed that as basically being something to look in.
True.
So with that being said, do we need to go let them come out early? Instead, does it matter what time they set up? Because we know they can only take up so much space in each zone. Where
I don't see a
before, I
re-
guess they could have put, the whole zone could have been covered, but now it can't.
I don't see a reason to change, actually, myself.
And it's, again, I could go, it really is no super thing to me. I was just mentioning my point because it had been mentioned
Yes.
by some citizens.
I agree with Councilman Phillips. I've also heard those same complaints.
Okay.
And when you're on vacation, you don't want to hear a lot of, especially the houses that are right next to a walkover. It's not a nice amenity for the person renting that house. So I agree with the suggestion that Councilman Phillips put forth.
I'd be for leaving it at 7.
I still think 7 is a good balance.
And you
7 for
basically
me,
said
too,
that,
yeah.
well, let's make a motion that we leave the times as they're already stated from 7 AM setup time and no later than 7 PM takedown time. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Nay.
3-2.
If I may request real quick, can we have a brief recess? Basically,
It's way past lunch.
Call a recess.
thank you.
Can we break for lunch?
it covered.
We are wearing out the audience.
They don't want us to talk about it. They said that should be a staff thing to get together and bring it back to us. We're going to police them.
Well,
Okay. All right, I'll bring it up. Call this meeting back into order.
Could I suggest that item number D, we could come to a pretty quick, easy decision on vendors being allowed or not allowed to put up empty cabanas and rent them from the beach?
so moved.
Well, the answer is, we do not permit that.
That's right.
Yes.
Okay.
Have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. All right, next. The concerns as far as enforcement. Are we gonna look to maybe let the staff handle that, to look into that and then come back to us and tell us, get their game plan together before we make a final thing on that?
Well, I talked to both of the chiefs a week or so ago about this and enforcement, and there was only one citation written on the beach. Chief Assemeyer believes education instead of fines. That's fine, but I don't know how far that should go.
Respectfully, that was this past season where vendors weren't allowed to set up. So if we're specifically talking about enforcement for the commercial vendors, there's already a fine built into the $250 into the existing ordinance for, any hiccups with, so that can just translate over.
Okay.
No, but there were commercial vendors out there putting up umbrellas every day. So I think the issue here was speeding and parking and,
Right, but that should just be a police function, not
No,
y'all trying
no,
to
I
figure
agree
out
with
how to
that.
especially
Yeah.
enforce.
I agree with that.
Well, here's the thing, if we have policemen out there every morning, which wouldn't be an easy thing to do, they wouldn't just enforce on the vendors. If someone else was parked in a bike lane, they'd get a ticket too.
Yeah.
But there's nothing wrong, I don't believe, with going and keeping a special eye on the vendors. I'll tell you, the driving I saw the year before last, and if they pull up on, the one guy was driving on the wrong side of the road, in the bike lane, parking in the bike lane, on the sidewalk, on private property, and you ticket him for that, and then he leaves and goes up to the next block and does the same thing, you ticket him again.
So that's a discussion for the council to have with police department, and saying that we strongly encourage you to do some enforcement on the vendors, particularly to send the message out at the beginning of the season that we want them to completely abide by the rules, traffic rules and that, and the safety rules. And,
Well,
yeah,
we have both chiefs here.
okay, and then the other side of it is, we, as a council, if you will call it a sense of the council, is that a rigorous but diplomatic enforcement of the rules on the beach. And it's not just the cabana lines, which are pretty solid, but the other type of issue is the dogs on the beach and the bottles on the beach. That, and the sense of the council being that we've got these rules, let's enforce them.
And additionally, when we move to the permit procedures for the vendors, if we have a reoccurring infractions like that, we pull the permit at the
Exactly.
discretion of the council, with recommendations from the chiefs if necessary.
I want the message to be there, if you want to do business on Sunset Beach, you're going to have to follow all the regulations.
Is that not the main purpose of our putting in a permit process?
Yeah, it gives us.
I'm not
it
talking
gives
about
us
just the
leverage.
vendors.
Yeah.
Right.
It gives us the leverage, but then, yeah.
Then we already decided three strikes, you're out, right?
No.
We talked about it, we haven't put it into motion, but we can.
Can I
Go ahead.
suggest
Yeah.
that I'm taking all these notes and putting all this together? I was gonna put all that into an ordinance amendment that I should bring y'all. You don't need to make a
And
motion
then
on
we
every
can go
little
through it when we go
Okay.
through the.
thing.
okay.
Just
Yeah.
let's, because you might find something that you're made a motion on now that we can't put into that ordinance after attorney's review. So let's just,
So we're gonna
Come
say
to a
E is gonna
consensus
go
on
to
these
you to
things,
find out and come
and
back to
I'll
us.
draft something for y'all and the
Yeah.
attorney to review.
Yeah.
Thank
So somewhere in there is,
There's a
how many,
three-strike
how many
rule already.
warnings, whether it's a three-strike
Yeah.
rule or whatever it happens to be. Okay.
And we'll include in that any other infractions, not just infractions on the Strand. So this will include vehicular infractions on Main Street.
Yeah.
Will apply towards their penalties before review of permit.
With that being said, do we need to call that the fee will stay the same on the infraction fines as far as these infractions here pertaining to the vendors?
Well,
This $250 fee, or do you still want to wait on that to go in with that ordinance that you're not gonna?
I think that's fine, but what I was gonna say is that's not just for the vendors. I'm gonna point that out.
Okay.
That's the infraction in the ordinance right now.
I think it should stay the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Do we need to do a re-motion on
So-
that to stay the same, or since it's
No.
already in there, we just leave it?
You just leave
Okay,
it.
that puts us to the next thing, which would be, should vendors renting of umbrellas be treated the same general way as cabanas, including the, in rules 9507A1, cabanas collectively involved shading devices?
I neglected to read carefully the next rule after that, which excluded
Okay,
the umbrellas. The concern that is developed, that I was trying to address is, okay, if however we're doing their limiting, what if they go out there and just take a handful of umbrellas and stake out spaces in the Cabana area?
Which is what they were doing last season.
Yeah, and to then give somebody a chance to, you know, the idea now, if they, is, would they be using the umbrellas to go up there, setting them early before 7 o'clock in the morning? You know, so the question is there a timeline on the umbrellas being set up and taken down? And can they be used to, save spaces or take up spaces so they've got more optimum places to put their tents when
Well,
they get a chance?
first of all, no vendors should be out there staking out spaces. That, to me, is a direct violation. Nobody should be out there sticking an umbrella there or laying a tent down to reserve a space. Starts at 7 o'clock. I don't care whether you're somebody renting a house or a commercial vendor. And as far as what we're setting up now, if these are vendors setting up umbrellas, they should have to follow the same rules.
Umbrellas can be placed anywhere on the beach.
Right.
They're not required to be placed the way cabanas are.
Correct.
That's right.
I don't know how you're gonna enforce that.
Well, I guess the big thing is umbrellas, are they subject to the same time limit? Put them up at 7 o'clock, 7 a.m. or later?
I think
Okay.
not, because almost everybody that comes to the beach, not everybody that comes to the beach, but a lot of people that come to the beach bring an umbrella with them. Some people hire or rent umbrellas and chairs,
My point is.
but
the
they can be
7
placed
this-
anywhere.
My question is not anywhere, it's any time. It's 7 a.m. is the setup time for cabanas.
Well, I don't think they should be,
No earlier than. Are we saying the same thing for umbrellas?
I would agree with that.
That's,
Yeah, I think we should. And if they put them up if a vendor pays the fees for 20 spots, and he goes out there and there are umbrellas in those spots, I think that's unfair to them.
Let me ask a question. Suppose it's somebody that's renting a house on the island and they want to go sit on the beach at 6 o'clock and they carry their umbrella with them and they're not in the Cabana area, they're on the public beach. I don't think you can limit that. That's like saying you can't go out on the beach until 7 o'clock.
We're saying you can't set up the umbrellas till 7 o'clock. Before 7 o'clock, you really don't need an umbrella.
Well, that's true, but they'll just have to carry it with them. They'll have to carry it with
They
them.
carry down and then 7 o'clock they put it up. That's,
I think we have to be consistent.
So would that be a motion that only, that any shading?
How would you write that in the ordinance so that you're not treating umbrellas totally like a cabana?
in the setup time, you put, you specifically put
setup
shading.
Shading devices.
Yeah, in the bullet that covers the setup time and takedown time, you put shading devices. Cabanas and shading devices.
Yeah, just under F, we'll just add umbrellas.
Fine, okay. I don't have a problem with that.
So do we need a motion that we'll say at 7 o'clock in the morning is the earliest anything can be put up as far as a shading device goes?
I think,
I
No,
think
no.
as long as Hiram's taking notes.
Yeah.
yeah.
Just taking notes.
Okay. Is there anything else, Council?
Yeah, I have a concern that is not on this list.
Okay.
And that is the way private property owners are treated if they set up chairs or anything else in front of cabanas. There are some people that occupy these cabanas that get really rude to people who pay taxes in this town, want to go to the beach, say 11 o'clock in the morning, carry a beach chair with them and an umbrella with them, and there's no place where the cabanas are for them to put their umbrella up, and they have every right to put an umbrella anywhere on that beach they want to.
That's right.
I agree with that.
But these people, but there should be some enforcement of rudeness to these people. These people are getting angry remarks made at them. You're in my view. They're not renting a clear view to the ocean. They should be made to understand that.
So what do we do about that?
I don't know. I really don't know. I think the vendors should educate their patrons that they're not to be rude to people that are in front of them, that those people have every right to use that beach as much as they do.
I don't see that working.
I mean, people are gonna be
Okay,
rude
you
irrespective
could-
of what they're told.
You can rent this tent,
Yes,
but you
but it's-
can't be rude.
Well, let's say you can't shake your towel and shake sand on somebody that's sitting in front of you.
That would not work with me.
Well, right. So that's what's happening.
I don't know that we can legislate smiley demeanors.
Yeah. People are gonna be rude no matter what you do. I mean, if they're rude people, that's how they are. And,
It's just unfortunate.
yeah, it's unfortunate, but I don't know that you can do anything about it. What, are you gonna
question-
lock them up?
Question for Beach Patrol
No.
and police is, at what point does that type of behavior cross the line where they should be reaching out to either the Beach Patrol or the police department for support?
Don't everybody answer at once.
Send the biggest Beach Patrol guy down to go have a little talk with them?
There's some truth to that sometimes. It's personal comfort, I guess. on when somebody feels threatened or intimidated. It's gonna be different with everybody, I would think, right? Law enforcement, I'm sure, gets calls for different threatening situations that, you know, so you might feel threatened one day and same situation happens to somebody else and they might not. We dealt with that every day last summer. And for the most part, de-escalated a lot of things and didn't need law enforcement support.
So what I'm hearing you say, that if a person and a cabana operator, somebody occupying a cabana, you know, are getting into some type of dispute like that, then start off by contacting Beach Patrol?
Yeah, they can, certainly the first option's wave them down, if, you know,
So,
or call 911.
so Paul, what you're really saying is you've dealt with these situations in the past with some frequency, and you've always been able to de-escalate and leave everybody pretty happy?
I would be shocked if that's true. Last year, we took, when we put the whole beach patrol thing together last year, had our initial meetings, hired seasonal employees, used Chief Childers and I. My first thought or goal for beach patrol is be nice. You know, you be nice, and you know, they look back, well, when can't we be nice? I said, I'll let you know when not to be nice. Or Deputy Chief Childers will let you know. And there's only one, you know, I had this conversation several times when I was out there for, you know, every day and talking to different people. And when Beach Patrol called for my support or Richard's support, there's only one more person that's gonna talk to him after me. And that's him. So we either figure it out or, and I never had to call Chief Claymore. So we put a high importance on taking care of people, enforcing the ordinances through education, and it worked. A lot of the variables you're talking about Monday and today, it's a new twist of ball for us, you know. We gotta unravel that yarn and see how it's all gonna shake out. If I had a magical de-escalation ball to give to each Beach Patrol employee to give them, you know, how to deal with every situation out there, I would, but
Well,
I don't have that either. So we got teaching and educating and training our employees to deal with those situations is what we do.
that's fine. You start out being nice, which I would expect any of you to do anyway. And if it goes on, then you become stern with them. And you would say, you've got the space that you've got here. Other people can set up anywhere they want. And if you can't live with that, then we go to the citation route. Any other thoughts on that?
Thanks, Chief.
Any more comments or suggestions or anything while we're here?
The only thing, I mean, there's one point I don't think we've really circled around. We talked about the numbers. We talked about tent packets, but we didn't go in through, you know, the number of tents, number of packages that we would permit out, or the process for doing it. And I think that's something that the staff should make a recommendation.
Well, we still have to apparently go count the spaces that are available.
Verify
Yeah.
Yeah,
John's
and
numbers.
then
And
come back to you with the number of packages. All that could just be built in either to a process or into the ordinance language. It doesn't necessarily have to be in that ordinance language. That could be fluctuated by policy or just by the application itself. But we can determine all that as we go through the process of figuring the
Yeah.
rest of this out.
figure out which ones are policy and which ones are
Yeah.
are ordinance related. Yeah.
Do we
comfortable
wanna
with
put
that?
that on our directives for the 21st meeting?
No,
No? Which one do you wanna put it on? You'll go up to the third
February.
February meeting?
I don't know if, just let us add it to the agenda as soon as we can get to
Okay.
it. I've got 4 members of Public Works, they're still trying to finish up walkways. We don't have any personnel for beach patrol this time of year, so it's gonna take staff pulled from other places to go do a lot of this stuff.
All right, to be determined on that.
And a week is not enough, because we'll have that agenda packet out next week.
Okay.
I won't have this done by Tuesday.
One of the things that I don't think that we talked about, that I believe that we want to include here, is that for every commercial cabana set up, that it's labeled with the,
The name and contact and all, yeah, I've got that
Yeah.
on here from previous discussions
Okay.
like the other day.
okay.
Anything else? Can I have a motion to adjourn?
You have another agenda item y'all placed on at the beginning. Planning board appointment.
Planning board, I'm sorry. Up is about the planning board appointment. Do we have any discussion on that?
Well, if it's legal, we have one candidate that applied previously, a highly qualified candidate. And personally, I get tired of putting out notice after notice after notice, and no one applies. And then by the time you set up your interviews, if we can legally do it, I make a motion that we appoint Don Eggers
No,
to.
that's-
No?
I think the reason that the mayor wanted this on earlier was just to make sure that y'all advertised. And I believe 2 other council members also brought it up, or maybe 3, so. We're just asking if you want us to advertise this out and go ahead and get in the paper and then have y'all interview sometime later. You'll still be,
What timeline do we have then?
I think we're looking at February 6th to be the deadline. Get it in a couple newspapers again. February 6th be the timeline, and then y'all make an appointment at the second meeting in February, where hopefully we'll have had interviews prior to that. Which I understand not everybody will be here at that second meeting.
To be consistent, I believe with our past actions and what's in our rules that we should do, I believe we should advertise this position. So I make a motion that we advertise.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We had a,
Aye, but I just wanted to say, so there will be a time limit where if we don't get any other applicants, we'll say
February 6th
That's
will be
it.
the deadline.
February 6th. Okay, I'm good with that.
now, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.